Rod sold over 120 million albums worldwide, nearly 50 million in America alone, and scored 16 top 10 hits. And he remains a touring sensation, selling out shows anywhere he goes.
It's the classic rock and roll paradox. You've sold 250 million records, filled stadiums globally, and spent 50 years widely regarded as the ultimate, untouchable playboy. But today, standing at 81, the legendary Rod Stewart has finally admitted a truth that stuns even his most die-hard fans. Behind the raspy anthems, the iconic spiky hair, and the endless parade of glamorous muses, there is one devastating ghost, one specific woman he actually never got over. Rachel Hunter, and the heartbreak that nearly ended Rod. So, who was the one woman capable of bringing the ultimate rock and roll playboy to his knees? To the rest of the world, Rod Stewart was an absolute king of hearts, a man who treated romance like a revolving door of high-fashion models and glamorous starlets. He was the guy who literally co-wrote the book on living the flashy, unapologetic rock star lifestyle. But all of that superficial armor completely shattered in January of 1999. That was the exact moment his second wife, the stunning New Zealand supermodel Rachel Hunter, packed her bags and walked out the door of their shared Beverly Hills mansion.
Today, Kiwi supermodel Rachel Hunter broke her silence and answered criticism of her marriage. The new Mrs. Rod Stewart gave her first news conference since arriving home.
For the first time in his highly publicized life, Rod Stewart wasn't the person doing the leaving. He was the one left entirely behind, stranded in a massive, empty house, utterly blindsided by the sudden departure of the woman he genuinely believed would be his final curtain call. The emotional fallout from the split wasn't just a minor bump in the road for the singer. It was an absolute cataclysmic collapse that flipped his entire reality upside down. For months after Rachel walked out, Rod spiraled into a state of deep clinical depression and raw physical vulnerability that he had never experienced before. The man who used to command the stages of the world's biggest arenas suddenly found himself completely unable to function. He would wake up in the middle of the night, freezing cold and shaking uncontrollably, forced to tightly clutch hot water bottles to his chest just to stop the physical tremors of anxiety. His appetite completely vanished, causing his weight to plummet drastically as his body essentially mirrored the hollow, empty feeling consuming his mind. He was an 81-year-old icon looking back on a moment where he felt like a helpless child, paralyzed by the simple fact that the love of his life didn't want him anymore. It was a total, ego-crushing role reversal that fundamentally broke his lifelong perception of his own romantic invincibility. To cope with the overwhelming silence of his new reality, Rod turned his daily life into a rigid, almost desperate routine of self-preservation. He began checking his pulse at regular intervals throughout the day, genuinely terrified that the sheer weight of his broken heart was going to cause his body to physically give out. He filled his empty hours with intense therapy sessions, seeking out professional help to process a level of rejection he had never been forced to confront during his rise to global fame. When he couldn't sleep, he would spend hours meticulously working on his model railway layout, using the hyper-focused, quiet hobby as a desperate mental escape from the painful thoughts swirling in his head. The ultimate lady killer had been reduced to a fragile man hiding away in his attic, trying to piece his mind back together with tiny plastic trains. He freely admitted later that the sheer pain of the rejection made him feel as though his entire world had ended, proving that no amount of wealth or fame can shield a person from the agonizing equalizer of a truly broken heart. What made the situation even more difficult for Rod to process was the glaring public spotlight that magnified his private torment for the entire world to see. Every single tabloid on Earth was running front-page stories about the split, dissecting the failure of his marriage and gleefully highlighting the vulnerability of a rock legend who had finally met his match. For a man whose entire public brand was built on being the cool, effortless seducer, having his heartbreak commodified into celebrity gossip was a deeply humiliating experience. Yet, instead of completely retreating from the world or putting up a fake, arrogant front, Rod chose a path of surprising, raw honesty. He didn't hide his tears or pretend that he was doing fine. He openly acknowledged to his inner circle and eventually to the public, that Rachel had completely destroyed him. That specific realization that he was entirely powerless to make the woman he adored stay became a permanent scar on his soul. Decades later, even as he stands at 81 years old with a lifetime of achievements behind him, the memory of that specific, devastating January morning still retains its sharp emotional sting. To understand why her departure completely destroyed him, we have to go back to the moment their paths first crossed. The romance: how a supermodel tamed a rock star. It was 1990, and Rod Stewart was firmly entrenched in his reputation as Hollywood's most uncatchable bachelor. He had already survived one high-profile marriage to Alana Stewart and a string of legendary romances with some of the most famous women on the planet, leaving a trail of broken hearts in his wake. He was 45 years old, wealthy beyond imagination, and content to spend the rest of his days drifting from one glamorous companion to the next without ever truly dropping his guard. But all of that calculated detachment evaporated the moment he walked into a Los Angeles nightclub and spotted Rachel Hunter. She was a 21-year-old rising supermodel from New Zealand, possessing a radiant, grounded energy that immediately cut through the superficial plastic veneer of the Hollywood party scene. Despite the massive 24-year age gap that would have given other men pause, Rod was instantly, entirely transfixed. The courtship that followed was a whirlwind of old-school romance that defied everyone's expectations, including Rod's own. For the first time in his adult life, the notorious playboy wasn't playing a game of emotional cat and mouse. He was actively, desperately trying to prove to a young woman that he was worthy of her commitment. Rachel wasn't easily swayed by the typical rock star trappings, which only made Rod pursue her with even greater intensity. He courted her with an earnestness that his close friends had never witnessed before, trading his wild, late-night partying for quiet dinners and deep, hours-long conversations. Within just 3 short months of their initial meeting, Rod knew he was completely done with the bachelor lifestyle. On December 15, 1990, they stood before family and friends at the Beverly Hills Presbyterian Church and exchanged vows. To the media, it looked like just another cliché rock star wedding to a beautiful blonde, but to Rod, it was a sacred turning point. He genuinely believed he had finally found his absolute equal, the definitive anchor that would keep him grounded for the rest of his life. For the next several years, their marriage became the absolute centerpiece of Rod's existence, transforming him from a nomadic rock star into a dedicated family man. They welcomed 2 children together, Liam and Renee, and Rod took immense pride in building a stable, loving domestic sanctuary away from the chaos of the music industry. He was utterly devoted to Rachel, happily catering to her every need and reshaping his entire global touring schedule just to ensure he was never away from home for too long. He romanticized their bond to an incredible degree, convinced that the sheer intensity of his love was enough to shield their marriage from the common pitfalls of celebrity relationships. To the outside world, they were the ultimate golden couple, frequently photographed laughing on red carpets, vacationing on luxury yachts, and presenting a picture-perfect image of domestic bliss. Rod completely bought into his own fairy tale, fully believing that he had successfully tamed his inner demons and that Rachel would be by his side until his very last breath. However, beneath the shiny, flawless surface of their public life, quiet warning signs were beginning to form. Signs that Rod, blinded by his own adoration, completely chose to ignore. Rachel had married Rod when she was barely out of her teens, jumping straight from her childhood home into the overwhelming, highly structured world of a global superstar. As the years rolled on and she entered her late 20s, her perspective on life naturally began to shift. She was no longer the impressionable young girl who had been swept off her feet. She was growing into an independent adult woman who wanted to discover who she was outside the massive, all-consuming shadow of her husband's fame. She began to feel increasingly suffocated by the protective, luxury cage Rod had built around her, realizing that she had never actually experienced life as an independent individual. Rod, operating from a place of deep-seated insecurity, mistook her growing need for personal space as a minor phase rather than a fundamental shift in her identity, continuing to smother her with affection and material gifts. The tragic irony of their romance was that Rod's immense love for Rachel was the exact thing driving her away. He had constructed his entire psychological identity around being her protector and provider, failing to realize that what she actually needed was room to breathe and find her own voice. When the end finally came in 1999, it wasn't sparked by a dramatic betrayal or a scandalous affair. It was simply the inevitable result of a young woman realizing she needed to claim her own life before it was too late. For Rod, the realization that his wealth, his fame, and his absolute adoration were completely powerless to save the relationship was an agonizing pill to swallow. It proved to him that you can give someone the entire world, but you can never force them to want to stay in yours. That profound, humbling realization reshaped his entire understanding of love, leaving a permanent ache in his chest that would follow him all the way into his 80s. But Rachel wasn't the first woman to shape Rod's messy heart. She was just the culmination of a lifetime spent running from loneliness. Young Rod, the London scene, and early muses. The ultimate playboy's reputation wasn't built overnight. It was forged in the roaring, chaotic center of the 60s and 70s London music scene. Long before he was a global icon wearing silk suits in Beverly Hills, Rod Stewart was just a scruffy working-class kid from North London with a gravelly voice and a serious passion for football and fashion. As he started finding his footing in the music world, singing with the Jeff Beck Group and later fronting the Faces, he quickly discovered that rock stardom gave him access to a world of glamour he had only ever dreamed of. The London mod culture of the time was all about looking sharp, living fast, and chasing beautiful aesthetics. And Rod became the living embodiment of that lifestyle. He fell in love with the fast pace of the era, and his romantic life soon became just as energetic and heavily publicized as his chart-topping records. His first massive defining relationship came in the mid-70s when he met the Swedish actress and ultimate it-girl of the era, Britt Ekland. At the time, Britt was Hollywood royalty, famous for her roles and her high-profile marriage to Peter Sellers, and her pairing with Rod instantly turned them into a paparazzi obsession. Britt didn't just share Rod's life, she actively helped craft the legendary image the world came to know. She encouraged him to lean into the satin trousers, the theatrical makeup, and the glamorous, jet-set lifestyle that defined the late 70s rock elite. Their romance was a passionate, turbulent whirlwind played out across international headlines, full of lavish gifts, public arguments, and intense devotion.
After divorcing Peter Sellers, Britt dated Rod Stewart. Following her divorce from Peter Sellers, Britt entered into a relationship with rock star Rod Stewart.
When that relationship eventually burned out and ended in a bitter, multi-million-dollar lawsuit, it established a distinct pattern that Rod would follow for the next 2 decades. High-stakes love, immense public scrutiny, and a devastating emotional crash when the curtain finally fell. Not one to remain single for long, Rod soon channeled his heartbreak into a new romance, marrying Alana Hamilton in 1979. Alana, a gorgeous actress and model who had previously been married to George Hamilton, brought an element of sophisticated Hollywood style to Rod's world. Together, they had 2 children, Kimberly and Sean, and for a moment, it appeared that the wild rock star had finally settled into domestic life. But the grueling demands of Rod's skyrocketing career, combined with the relentless temptations of the touring lifestyle, quickly began to erode the foundations of the marriage. The relationship eventually collapsed under the weight of his global fame, leading to a divorce in 1984. This pattern repeated itself yet again during his long-term relationship with model Kelly Emberg, with whom he had a daughter, Ruby. To the outside observer, Rod was a serial dater who simply hopped from one blonde supermodel to the next, a man who viewed women as interchangeable accessories to his rock and roll fantasy. The reality, however, was far more complex than the tabloid headlines suggested. Behind the confident swagger and the endless parade of beautiful muses, Rod was driven by a deep, almost desperate fear of being alone. He was a man who fell in love deeply, instantly, and completely, throwing himself into every single romance with the wide-eyed optimism of a teenager. He romanticized his partners, putting them on pedestals and showering them with everything wealth could buy, only to feel utterly lost when the human reality of the relationship didn't match his fairy tale expectations. Each breakup left him genuinely shattered, yet his coping mechanism was always to immediately run toward the next romance, to escape the painful silence of an empty house. This emotional defense mechanism worked perfectly for years, protecting his ego and maintaining his public image as an untouchable lady killer, until he met Rachel Hunter. She was the one who broke the pattern, refusing to play her assigned role in his script and leaving him to face the loneliness he had spent a lifetime running from. While his personal life was a chaotic carousel, his musical career was transforming him from a scruffy pub singer into a global deity. The music and the power of pain, soundtracking his own heartaches. What the world didn't always realize, however, was just how deeply his musical genius was tethered to his emotional wreckage. Rod Stewart wasn't a manufactured pop star singing lines written by a corporate committee. He was an artist whose raw, raspy vocal delivery acted as a direct window into his soul. When his heart was full, his music soared with a celebratory, infectious joy. When it was broken, that gravelly voice carried a weight of sorrow that could move millions to tears. The ultimate irony of his career is that his greatest professional successes were often built directly upon the ashes of his most painful romantic collapses. He didn't just survive heartbreak, he processed it in public, turning his personal agony into universal anthems that defined the emotional landscape for entire generations. The devastating 1999 split with Rachel Hunter completely redefined Rod's relationship with his own art form. In the immediate aftermath of her departure, he found himself utterly unable to write or perform the upbeat, swaggering rock hits that had made him a household name. He couldn't just get on stage and sing about being sexy or living the high life when he was privately going to sleep with hot water bottles clamped to his chest to stop the shaking. Instead, he channeled that raw, unfiltered grief directly into his creative choices, leading to one of the most unexpected and massively successful pivots in modern music history, the Great American Songbook series. Stripped of the loud guitars and flashy synthesizers, Rod immersed himself in the timeless, melancholic standards of the mid-20th century. Tracks like I'll Be Seeing You and The Way You Look Tonight. These weren't just cover songs. They were vocal therapy sessions where an aging, heartbroken man could lay his vulnerability completely bare. The public responded to this raw honesty in a massive way, sending the multi-volume songbook project straight to the top of the global charts and earning Rod his very first Grammy Award. Listeners could hear the genuine ache in his delivery. They knew that when he sang about lost love and enduring longing, he wasn't acting. He was singing directly to a ghost. This era of his career proved that his staying power wasn't just about his iconic spiky hair or his showman energy, but his willingness to let his audience see him bleed. Even when he returned to writing his own original material on later albums like Time and Blood Red Roses, the shadow of his past heartbreaks loomed large over the tracks. He wrote songs that openly dissected the mistakes of his youth, the pain of divorce, and the haunting realization of how fragile love truly is. His music became older, wiser, and deeply reflective, reflecting a man who had finally stopped running from his feelings and started honoring them. Furthermore, his live performances during his later years took on a deeply poignant quality as these emotional tracks aged alongside him. Watching a global icon perform hits like You're in My Heart or The Killing of Georgie at 81 years old is a profoundly moving experience for fans who have traveled that same decades-long road with him. Every crack in his famous voice, every weathered note, and every reflective smile on stage carries the weight of a life fully lived, loved, and lost. He no longer needed to pretend to be the untouchable playboy of the 70s. He had earned the right to be a human being on stage, an elder statesman of rock who had survived the highest highs and the lowest lows. By turning his deepest personal agonies into timeless art, Rod created a permanent bridge of empathy between himself and his audience, ensuring that his musical legacy would always be defined by its authentic, beating heart. Yet, maintaining a voice like that and a lifestyle that is intense for over half a century eventually comes with a heavy physical price. Rod's vulnerability. For a man whose entire identity was built on effortless vitality, The physical realities of aging and illness hit like a sudden, violent wake-up call.
It was on the thyroid, so it was just above the vocal cords.
And how long did it take you to recover?
Oh, forever.
The first catastrophic blow arrived in May of 2000, barely a year after his devastating split from Rachel Hunter. During a routine medical checkup, doctors discovered a lump on Rod's thyroid that turned out to be cancerous. The news completely paralyzed him. He wasn't just facing a potentially life-threatening illness. The subsequent emergency surgery to remove the tumor sat fractions of a millimeter away from the vocal cords that had given him his life, his fame, and his emotional outlet. Following the operation, his legendary voice completely vanished. For months, he couldn't sing a single note, forced to confront the terrifying possibility that he had been permanently silenced. The psychological toll of that silence was staggering for an artist who had spent his entire adult life communicating through song. Rod had to painstakingly rebuild his vocal muscles from absolute scratch, undergoing an intense, grueling year of vocal therapy just to learn how to find his pitch again. It was a humbling, deeply frightening chapter that forced him to look in the mirror and see a vulnerable mortal rather than an invincible rock god. Though his voice eventually returned, retaining that signature, beautiful rasp, the scare forever changed his relationship with his body. He could no longer take his health for granted, nor could he pretend that time wasn't actively marching on. It was a profound internal shift that made him realize just how fragile his gift truly was, instilling a deep sense of gratitude that completely altered his approach to both his life and his career moving forward. Unfortunately, that wouldn't be his last major battle with the realities of human mortality. In 2016, Rod was quietly diagnosed with prostate cancer during another routine screening. Keeping the diagnosis a closely guarded secret from the public for 3 long years, he underwent aggressive treatment while continuing to perform high-energy shows around the world. He refused to let the illness define him or stop him from stepping onto the stage, using the live performances as a vital, life-affirming escape from his private medical anxieties. When he finally announced that he was in full remission during a charity event in 2019, he did so with a characteristically casual, upbeat attitude, urging men everywhere to get their regular checkups. But behind that brave, smiling public front lay the quiet understanding of a man who had stared down his own mortality multiple times and realized that his time on Earth was finite. As he entered his late 70s and moved toward 80, these intense health battles fundamentally reshaped how he viewed the concept of aging in the glaring spotlight of global fame. The man who once lived for wild nights and endless physical excess transitioned into a dedicated fitness enthusiast, tracking his workouts, monitoring his health metrics, and treating his body with the meticulous care of a professional athlete. He openly laughed at the absurdity of trying to look 25 forever, choosing instead to lean gracefully into his silver hair and the weathered, expressive lines on his face. By embracing his vulnerabilities rather than trying to hide them behind artificial cosmetic tricks, Rod achieved a rare, authentic dignity on stage. He became a living testament to resilience, showing his audience that true rock and roll spirit isn't about being young forever, but about having the courage to keep singing through the scars. With his health restored and his perspective forever altered, where did that leave the aging showman? Saying goodbye and the ghost in the wings. For Rod Stewart, entering his 8th decade didn't mean quietly retreating to a countryside estate to count his royalty checks. Instead, it sparked a profound, deeply reflective chapter marked by a deliberate shift in how he wanted to spend his remaining time on Earth. He launched massive, highly publicized global tours, such as his acclaimed One Last Time show, that were designed not as desperate grabs for relevance, but as joyful, definitive celebrations of a legendary journey. On stage, he remained the consummate entertainer, kicking soccer balls into the crowd, flashing that famous, mischievous grin, and leading stadium-wide sing-alongs. But beneath the glittering showmanship, there was an unmistakable undercurrent of nostalgia and closure. He openly acknowledged to his audiences that the days of grueling, months-long world tours were officially drawing to a close, framing these recent performances as a heartfelt, mutual goodbye between an iconic artist and the fans who had loved him for 50 years. This graceful transition into his elder years was made possible by the stable, deeply supportive domestic life he finally found with his third wife, Penny Lancaster. Marrying the British model and TV personality in 2007, Rod finally achieved the peaceful, enduring partnership that had eluded him during his wilder youth. Penny brought a calming, grounded presence to his chaotic world, giving him a secure emotional anchor and two more sons, Alistair and Aidan. At 81 years old, Rod's daily life is a far cry from the roaring, jet-set madness of the 70s and 80s. He is a proud patriarch, surrounded by an enormous, blended family of 8 children from various relationships, all of whom regularly gather under one roof. He has publicly credited Penny with saving him from himself, providing the unconditional love and emotional stability he spent a lifetime chasing through a revolving door of temporary muses. In her arms, the ultimate rock and roll playboy finally found a safe place to land, discovering that the quiet peace of an enduring marriage was far more fulfilling than the fleeting highs of bachelorhood. Yet, even within the warmth of this idyllic present, the human heart remains a complex, deeply stubborn archive of past emotions. When Rod recently looked back on his life and named Rachel Hunter as the one woman he actually never got over, it wasn't a slight against his current marriage, nor was it a desperate plea to rewrite history. Rather, it was the honest, vulnerable admission of an 80-year-old man who finally understands the anatomy of his own scars. Rachel was the definitive line in the sand of his existence, the precise boundary where his youthful, arrogant illusion of romantic invincibility ended and his real, fragile humanity began. The sheer agony of that 1999 heartbreak didn't just break his spirit. It permanently altered his emotional DNA, forcing him to grow up and look at love with a sense of profound reverence and humility. That specific ache became a permanent ghost in the wings of his life, a quiet companion that gave his later music its depth, his performances their raw authenticity, and his heart the capacity to truly appreciate the stable love he eventually found with Penny. Ultimately, Rod Stewart's journey stands as a beautiful, epic testament to a life fully lived, completely unshielded from the highest joys and the sharpest pains of the human experience. He ran through the decades at breakneck speed, chasing fame, music, and women with an insatiable appetite, only to discover that the most valuable thing he accumulated along the way was his own resilience. Standing at 80, he no longer has anything left to prove to the world. He has survived cancer, outlasted his musical peers, filled the world's greatest arenas, and loved with a terrifying, unfiltered intensity that left him permanently marked. As he looks out at the stadium lights during his final curtain calls, singing those timeless anthems with that beautifully weathered, raspy voice, he stands as a triumphant symbol of survival. He is a rock legend who had the courage to let the world see him bleed, proving that while fame can buy you an empire, it is the scars of our deepest heartbreaks that truly make us who we are. It is a rare thing for a global icon to drop the swagger and show the world their true, unprotected humanity. Rod Stewart spent a lifetime conquering stages and hearts, yet his ultimate victory wasn't maintaining an illusion of invincibility. It was having the courage to grow, to heal, and to openly honor the scars that made him human. At 81 years old, surrounded by the beautiful legacy of his music and family, he stands as living proof that even the wildest rock and roll hearts are ultimately refined by the quiet power of love and loss. It has been an absolutely unforgettable ride, tracking the highs and lows of this legendary showman. If you loved diving deep into the raw, untold history behind rock's greatest anthems and icons, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss our next musical journey.